Lost Judgment, as one would presume, is the sequel to RGG Studios' 2019 Yakuza spin-off, Judgment, otherwise known as Judge Eyes in Japan, where it released at the tail end of 2018. With Yakuza 7 making the switch to turn-based combat more akin to a Dragon Quest or Persona game, Judgment set to carry on Yakuza's legacy of brawler combat, and it's something it done very well, and only improved upon in this sequel. Despite also being set in locations carried over from the Yakuza titles, Judgment is very much its own thing, and though there are references to the Yakuza games, they are very minor and of so little consequence it really won't hurt if you've never played one before. Though you should play them, that is. The Yakuza games. They're pretty good. With Lost Judgment being a sequel, it is handled in a way that it's not imperative you play the first title. Though if you have any intent at all, I would recommend starting there instead of here. The story of Lost Judgment doesn't hinge on your understanding of the first game in any way, but certain character introductions and references may be lost on new players, and certain plot events will also be spoiled as the game unfolds. So while I wouldn't recommend skipping the first game, if you want to check this series out, it's also not necessary you play it to enjoy this one. Though you should. Play it, that is, the first Judgment game. It's pretty good. Now, without making you wait till the end of this video to get my ultimate takeaway from this game, I'll let you know now this stands a very high chance of being my game of the year. In fact, I find it hard to imagine anything passing it at this point. In almost every way, this surpasses what its predecessor accomplished, but there is an emphasis on almost in that sentence. There were a couple things I actually loathed about this playthrough, mostly in the optional content, which we'll get into later, but the main story itself really hit for me. Easily one of the tightest and most high-tension games I played this year, albeit one that treats its social responsibilities, in quotations, with very little regard. Sadly, this led to the game seeing a small degree of controversy after its release, and I'd like to touch on this briefly before we continue. So, disclaimer. Lost Judgment deals with touchy subjects involving sexual assault, suicide, and bullying, the handling of which from time to time may come off as socially irresponsible. I can't spoil how they develop the sexual assault stuff, but for as problematic as some people might see it, it also tells a very compelling story, and the developments themselves are not devoid of proper motivation. So I'm going to give this one a pass. There's also been some controversy over Yagami, our older main character, beating up high school kids, and I get the concern, but also, them kids. In fairness, when this all starts, he doesn't exactly know how young the kids are, but then he kind of just keeps doing it even after he knows. Which to me is funny and pretty well inexcusable as a character trait, but these kids are also a bunch of bastards, so fuck it. Considering for a moment though this is an M-rated game and does have an intended audience, I don't really think a lack of social responsibility, in quotations, is really hurting it that much. What social issues this game deals with and how it portrays them is pretty easy for mature players, the intended demographic, to measure and differentiate the right from the wrong in, and measure the validity of potential real-world applications. I get if this game fumbling in this regard is an issue for some people, but simply put, for me, it's not. Other player experiences may vary. Now, with all of that said, and having lost the last grain of respect many of you might have had for me, the court is now in session, so let's take a quick look at the story, characters, and locations in Lost Judgment. Lost Judgment opens with members of the Genda law firm defending a case in court of a recently highly publicized sexual assault incident. The case on the surface is as open and shut as they come, with numerous eyewitnesses and enough camera footage to seemingly cover the entire event. Though the defendant claims he's innocent from start to finish, there was never any doubt that the court would find him guilty, so it's no shock when that does indeed happen. Things do take a shocking turn immediately after, however, when the defendant implicates himself in a murder case to which he has an airtight alibi for and seemingly no way of having knowledge about. Having put the courts and police in a very awkward situation, it's clear there's more than just a sexual assault case going on here. But what's not clear is how any of it is actually possible. Meanwhile, Takayuki Yagami, our main character, current entrepreneurial detective and former practicing lawyer, goes to visit a friend in Ijincho who opened up his own detective agency and needs some help being shown the ropes. While there, Yagami gets pulled into a case investigating bullying complaints at a local school. It's short shortly after this where the genius in the writing really begins. As Yagami meets more people and learns more about them, Lost Judgment does what the best RGG games tend to do and starts blurring the separating lines between the A plot and the B plot until you are not even sure which is which anymore. Old and new, near and far, east and west, it all becomes the same in Lost Judgment. And, not for the first time, I find myself floored with what they built for a story here. Refreshingly, Lost Judgment doesn't pull any punches either, committing simply to the idea of the story unfolding how it should, regardless of the consequences. For as many times as it lifts you up, it'll pull you right back down, stomp your heart, and tell you to eat it, and it's great. Much like how Yakuza 7 put a lot of emphasis on the gray zones of Japan, as they put it, Lost Judgment takes a look at the blind spots of law enforcement, the written law, and the justice system as they know it. How power struggles, whether in a courtroom, the branches of government, or in a classroom, can cause some people to fall through the cracks and create a perpetual cycle of victims denied justice and proper care and attention. It's a powerful observation and message woven really well into a rather unassuming, relentlessly morphing murder mystery. But being that this is a mystery plot, I can't say more about the story beyond this, but I can talk about the town a little bit. As you can guess, most of this game is set in Ijincho, the main location from Yakuza 7, though there will be trips back to Kamurocho every now and then. Both towns offer no shortage of things to do or sights to see, but for the most part, the sights in Ijincho won't be anything new if you've played Yakuza 7, and neither will Kamurocho's if you played any of the Yakuza or Judgment games before that. In saying that though, I do want to highlight a rather strange sensation I felt playing this. When I played through Yakuza 7 and explored Ijincho for the first time and got to know the town inside and out, it really began to feel like Ichiban's town. Like he really belonged there, he had a certain connection to the city, and he and the city breathed new life into each other. Playing as Yagami here, I felt less of a connection to the city, but not really in a bad way. The sights and sounds were all familiar to me as a player, but I had the distinct feeling of being a tourist there. Like a fish out of water. Maybe it was just me, but even though it was also familiar, I felt a really big tonal shift as Yagami that made the town, in a way, feel entirely new again. What didn't feel new, however, was the cast. Aside from Yagami, you know, beating on kids and all, it really feels like the old cast and crew haven't changed a bit. Jumping into this adventure and seeing all their faces again really made me realize how much I'd actually missed this crew. Yagami and Kaito have such great chemistry together, and the new cast members mix in very well with the crew and play their respective roles to a T. As far as the cast goes, I gotta say, I love each and every one of them. Even if many of the recurring characters from the last game maybe don't get that much screen time. Now let's take a look at beating up kids, or rather, let's take a look at the combat. A student. A student. Combat is very much in line with older Yakuza titles, and it feels really good. With each new iteration on the brawler combat since Yakuza 6, it feels like we're working our way back towards Yakuza 0, which is ultimately a good thing. Yagami has 3 styles you can switch between on the fly, each with their own balance and practical application, their own battle music which also changes on the fly, and their own skill trees which are upgraded using SP that the game hands out in no small quantity following battle or quest completion. In a way, choosing the right fighting style depending on the situation feels like navigating Fire Emblem's weapon triangle system, only with far less riding on it. Though you may want a stance with better crowd control when fighting larger groups of enemies, you can safely brute force the fight however you want. Mechanically, fighting works how you would expect. You have 2 buttons for your basic attacks, a button for a grapple, and a button that works as a quick step, running, and jumping over enemies or wall jumping. Some attacks can be charged for greater damage, and you also have a block button. Of course, littering the environment, there's no shortage of items to pick up and use as weapons, each of which can be used a set amount of times before breaking, or until performing an X attack with them. Up top here is the X gauge, which needs to be charged through standard combat to perform the aforementioned X attacks. These quick little context-sensitive attack animations you more or less are under control to deal massive damage with. Some of them will have built-in QTEs, but not many of them. These are as slick as ever and rather plentiful, with unique attacks for most weapons and character orientations. I did, however, run into a glitch with these just once. X attacks work work by centering your character in a newly loaded environment so they have enough space to perform said attack without causing any environmental or camera issues. However, it's possible for the game to accidentally keep an old background story to be cut in, as you can see in this clip here, which can make for a pretty jarring experience, but it is very, very rare. In my 57 to 58 hour playthrough of this game, I've seen this happen a grand total of once. Enemies also have X attacks known as deadly attacks in this game, but you can block and counterattack them with good timing. If you choose, you can forego X attacks and use the gauge to enter a powered up state until you either drain the gauge, exit combat, or end the state manually. There are slots you can hotfix items into, but I never really found a necessary use for them. If you're low on health, you can pause battle at any time to slam some energy drinks or Mountain Dew, scarf down a half dozen takeout burgers from the Smile Burger or Yakisoba Pan ordered from the school's Not Yakisoba Pan Angel. If you didn't get that reference, play 13 Sentinels, it's really good. In addition to buffing your stats by spending SP, you can also buff them by equipping new gear and accessories usually found at the local shops. On certain quests, you even get to go undercover and equip disguises. See, it's a bad idea for a detective to go out onto the street looking like an ordinary guy. That's just what a detective would look like. What a detective certainly wouldn't look like is a motherfucking vampire. Combat balance overall on normal difficulty felt really easy, perhaps one of the easiest in the series so far. Though there were a few fights towards the end that really did give me a run for my money. Enemies that hit real hard and move real fast that I actually died to a few times before overcoming them. The campaign itself is roughly 25 hours, and I do feel like it could have used more bosses and more difficulty pinches along the way. But overall, it did feel like a rather comfy ride. Now there is more to the gameplay than just combat. Lost Judgment makes quite an effort to make exploring the world a little more exciting by giving you a skateboard to get around with and coins to collect while you're on them. There's also these little squirrel pictures hidden all over the world that you can use numerous gadgets and the amazing Detective Doggo to find hidden treasures from. If I had any complaints about this though, it's just that all these gadgets and the dog himself rarely come up in the main story, and they really feel like they could or otherwise should have been implemented a little more frequently. There's also more focus on verticality now with added platforming sections. The tailing missions return from the last game as well. Missions where you simply follow behind somebody on the street and try not to get seen. They're a little smoother than they were before and a little more forgiving, and I'm guessing as a response to the numerous people who complained about them before, not that I was one of them, they really only come up in these side quests aside from the early game tutorial on them. We also have chase sequences where Yagami auto runs after targets and you steer him around small objects and respond to the QTEs as they come up. This is a bit of a race against the clock, though a very, very easy one to win. As you both run, both of your HP meters drain. There's little bottles you can steer Yagami into to pick up to reclaim some of your HP, and even some obstacles you can steer him into to attack the enemy with, though that's about it. It's more or less just an expanded and easier version of this old game. Lost Judgment also contains stealth missions. These are pretty self-explanatory. Just go around, move from marker to marker without being seen, and create distractions as the game prompts you for them. Dialogue segments may also provide sequences where you question or present evidence to the other person. And the game also employs an investigation mode where you examine environments in first person to discover clues or solve mysteries. It's a small collection of gameplay modes, but it serves the short runtime of the main campaign very well. So these are all things you'll encounter at least once over the course of the main campaign. But like any RGG game, of course, there's a load of extra stuff you only see by taking the road less traveled. So let's take a look at the side content and the sub-stories. I mentioned earlier that Judgment is very much its own thing, and tonally it stands quite apart from the Yakuza games. Though I do think it ultimately suits Yagami as a character and the story to have this sort of tonal distinction, if you're coming from Yakuza expecting heaps of really wacky sub-stories and minigames, you might be a little underwhelmed here. It's not that the amount of content is underwhelming or anything. How Long to Beat has the completionist time at just under 90 hours. It's just that the overall energy surrounding the side content doesn't feel the same. We have a lot of returning minigames like the batting cages, darts, the Sega Arcade, which has a really cool new House of the Dead clone game in it, the drone races return, and the virtual reality minigame, which is now a sort of competitive Mario Party type experience. There's a master system set up in Yagami's office you can get loads of games for, so on and so forth. That sort of stuff all still really holds its own here. The sub-stories themselves, the short missions you come across and pick up from NPCs, return, but they've taken a bit of a backseat or otherwise been sectioned off a little different than normal. normal. Some sub-stories are picked up on the map like usual, some come in through the detective agency's job board, and others can be tracked down by honing in on keywords that appear across social media. Then many more are used to create the School Stories quest line. What's essentially a massive 20 to 30 hour quest made up of 10 large sub-quests all under one umbrella. I'm okay with most of these ideas. It's nice that the quests no longer clutter the map or derail your adventure by simply stepping too close to a quest marker as they did in previous titles. And it's nice that they've been implemented in a way that's more organic to Yagami's job. However... Oi! What you doing there, huh? I'm just working on my quest log. You know, it's tough work, but I'm almost there. Oh yeah? So, what are you gonna do about the rest of it? The what? Progressing the School Stories questline, which holds a large amount of the game's side quests and mini-games and has one giant overarching narrative between them, can be an absolutely infuriating and nightmare slog that, while yes, I felt had a nice payoff, is so draining I find it hard to say it's worth completing. Thing is, some of this stuff is fine. Boxing minigame, not amazing but not bad. Skateboard races, a bit jank but easy enough to get through. Bike races, kind of like Road Rash Light and less exciting, but still easy enough to get through. Photography is photography, and the esports is just Virtua Fighter 5, which of course is great. But when you hit the robotics club, oh boy, this has got to be one of the worst minigames I've seen come out of RGG yet. On paper, it's a simple matter of upgrading little robots, gathering Tetris-shaped blocks in an arena, and making a colored path with said blocks to the enemy's spawn point to take it over and win. In practice, it is a freaking pile of shit, and I hate it. Partner AI is super brain dead and will cause more issues for you than they'll likely solve. The way they handle the parts upgrade system too is done in a way that the enemy carts will always have access to more advanced tech than you, so you basically always come into a match at a disadvantage. Further, once the enemy does begin to close in, they can just wait at your spawn point and spawn kill you with no recourse. It also seems at times that they just know where these Tetris blocks are going to appear, and they'll wait there early to get them before you can. That's probably not how it's actually working, and it's just coincidence that I got frustrated over with, but it does feel like it happens. Thankfully, I did find a good strategy to get around this. First, put all your focus into speed. Grab this boss, add the speed motor, add this AI add the chip, drill, drop the game to the easiest difficulty setting, and it's still shit. There's no helping this thing. It's just, this minigame literally makes me feel like I'm at the end of my rope.
You are.
What?
You're literally at the end of your rope.
Oh. In all actuality though, I really don't like this. This is the kind of minigame I would gladly stop playing in any other RGG game and move on from. However, because it, along with the other minigames I mentioned earlier and a couple others, are required to complete the School Stories overarching narrative, it has to be done, or you have to throw all your progress on the quest away. When one quest makes up so much of the optional content, it's hard to come to terms with dropping it. I like the idea of tying a lot of the optional content together like this for one big payoff, but it would be so much better if the minigames didn't range from okay at best to total pile of shit, and if they weren't all inherently required to complete it. If they ever do something like this again, I definitely prefer if the minigame involvement was scaled back significantly. So yeah, really not a fan of how this was executed. But that is ultimately my biggest issue with the entire game, and it's entirely optional. And having addressed my one and only real issue with this game that I think was worth talking about, there's not much left to look at but the technical aspects. Alright, here, take this. Is this about low enough? Is this about how he's standing?
Yeah.
It's about how he walks. Yep. Oh, totally doable. It's totally doable. Ow, my back. Unsurprisingly, the game looks and runs great. There are areas, of course, if you look close, you might see some old PS2-ish textures or animations. Some stiffness in cutscenes that might have a lot of NPCs in them, but that's about it. Sound effects are on point, and the voice acting maintains the series' very high bar of quality. The game does support English and Japanese audio, but being upfront, I didn't check out this game's English, at least not on my own. I had heard some of it in YouTube videos before I played the game, and heard the English cast for the first first Judgment, and I thought all that sounded great, but for me, Japanese just fits the game better. The OST also meets the series' high standard and reuses a lot of old familiar series tunes. But there is one track in here I really adored and feel might be among the series' best. That track being Viper, a certain character's main theme. Now it's not just the pure orchestration of the track that makes it good, though granted that's also great, blending tones and melodies that give the illusion of a twisted Christmas or something. It also lifts elements from Bernard Herrmann's work on Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. But rather, it's the way the theme perfectly encapsulates the violent threat and unpredictable nature of the character it was written for. It really is incredible. Otherwise, where I played on PS5, the performance was pretty darn solid. I did have one crash trying to access my Master System games, but that was about it. This is a solid showing all around in terms of performance. And really, there's not much more else we can add here, which just leaves me to the closing thoughts. Overall, I think this was a fantastic experience, but I let you guys know that up front, and hopefully my judgment there wasn't too lost on you. Anyway, it looks good, it sounds good, it feels good, it has an incredible story with important themes and a great cast of memorable characters with excellent chemistry. And I won't lie, this game actually had me morally conflicted in a few areas and choked up in a few more. It is definitely an emotional ride. And maybe this is a bit shallow for some people, but if a game really deeply emotionally resonates with me, then it's a game that's likely going to go really high in my books. Often such a feat makes a game surpass its flaws for me. And thankfully, Lost Judgment really doesn't have that many flaws to begin with. At least, not in my opinion. It's just all around a really good game. Though the future of the series is dubious at best, hopefully this is a sign of good things to come from RGG after losing a few of its key players. Either way, I'm always on board to check out what comes next for them, but that is where I'm gonna have to leave this one today. If you guys found this video helpful or useful at all, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, share the video if you can. Links to all of my socials and my Patreon support page are in the description below, and as always, folks, thanks for watching. Should I have a dialogue? Something really fucking stupid?
No.
Well, I mean, I can not use it if I want, but it's super loud out here, too. A student. Let me try again. A student. So stupid. Alright, let me... I can't not laugh at that in my head because it's too dumb. Alright, I'm just gonna stare that way. It's just, this minigame literally has me... I don't know, do I close this video with like a classic Yakuza quick zoom in on somebody's face while they're shouting something? I don't really have any weapons, maybe this... Okay. That's good.